Thank you all for joining us tonight. It is so wonderful to see your faces. I recognize so many of you, and it is really a joy to have you. I think that our furthest person away is Rabbi Olya Weinstein, who's watching from Jerusalem at 2 in the morning, because she was so moved by this film that she really wanted to be here with you tonight. So thank you so much for coming. Most of you know me, I'm Karyn Gershon, and I am going to be co-moderating tonight with Jessica Schachter. Hi, Jessica. And just wanted to say a few words before we get underway. I want to take just 1 minute to thank all of you who have been asking about what's going on with the state of the protests in Belarus. This has been a very daunting and inspiring week for the women in the Project Kesher network. As you may know, women have been the face of the anti-government protests, and the trending hashtag, Fight Like a Belarusian Girl, has really been taking over the internet and the part of the world where they live. Despite police brutality, the protests are now entering their second month, and this week hundreds were arrested again. And this time 8 people in the Project Kesher Belarus network were arrested. Our leadership is monitoring the situation and making sure that they are supporting the women and their families to get these family members released from jail. At this time, we are one of the few nonprofits that continues to have a working bank account in Belarus. So we are sending over money pretty much as fast as we can, because once people are arrested, they're often fired from their jobs. And so people can't get access to food and they can't get access to PPE. We actually lost a 47-year-old activist this week to COVID. It's been a really, really tough time. Our leaders are being visited in their homes by the police, and protesters are being threatened with their parental rights being taken away. So it is an extremely stressful situation. There is a little bit of limited hope at the moment, simply because the European governments are meeting with the opposition party. And so it's giving some hope to the protesters. So we will keep you posted. We will continue to send out emails updating everybody on the situation. And we really thank you all for reaching out to the activists who are just going through an extraordinarily tough time. Tonight, we are so proud to be introducing our community to the Radical Monarchs. The Radical Monarchs were founded by Anayvette Martinez and Marilyn Hollinquest to create opportunities for girls of color to form fierce sisterhood, celebrate their identities, and contribute radically to their communities. For those of you who know Project Kesher well, you will immediately see some parallels: fierce sisterhood and a celebration of identities. But while the women in our international network have feared ever being seen as radical, the Radical Monarchs have placed this piece of their mission and vision front and center. And it is this powerful ownership of the fact that social justice, equality for people of color, and the equality for women will be seen as radical no matter how it is presented. And in this moment, I found the greatest inspiration and desire to share the Radical Monarchs with our community. In the most authentic way, the Radical Monarchs are guiding young girls of color in the understanding that it is essential to embrace the justice of our rage, a concept highlighted in the work of June Jordan, and that it is essential to do so with a community that shares your reality and is by your side for the battle and the celebrations. Social justice work is hard, as they say in the film, wherever it is done. But the graduates of the Radical Monarchs, like the activists of Project Kesher, also know its joys. This week, the Project Kesher team worldwide in the US, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, and Israel watched We Are the Radical Monarchs and saw young girls who, like them, want to make the world right and are learning the skills to do so. But they saw that these girls already know the truth and start there without apology. We have so much to learn from them. So at this time, I would like to briefly welcome Savannah Leonards from POV, who made this film available to our community this week, to say just a few words. Savannah?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you so much to our friends at Project Kesher for hosting this wonderful event this evening and allowing me a moment to share some more about our organization. Before doing so, I want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement, particularly in recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day yesterday. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and would like to respectfully acknowledge the Lenape people as the traditional custodians of the land where I live and where I work. American Documentary is a national media arts organization based right here in Brooklyn, dedicated to supporting bold, independent documentary storytelling for the public good. We believe in the power of film to open minds and bridge divides, which is something that I see very in common with Project Kesher, which is why I'm so excited to partner. Our flagship series, POV, broadcasts on PBS on Mondays from about July through March. You can check your local listings to see when it's screening in your area. And you can also stream for free online from pbs.org. They're available the night of broadcast and for about 2 months afterwards. So we have some great films from this season up online. We're so excited to share this special film, We Are the Radical Monarchs, with you. It was our opening of the season of POV. It's a really special one. And we're really grateful to be with you all virtually during these unprecedented times. This period of social distancing has really underscored the importance of community, connection, and hope, all of which are reflected in this special film. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much, Savannah. And I want to pass the torch now to Jessica.
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, terrific. Our first question is for Anayvette Martinez, the co-founder and CEO of Programs and Communications of the Radical Monarchs. Anayvette is San Francisco native and child of Central American immigrants. Anayvette got her undergraduate degree at UCLA and her master's in ethnic studies at San Francisco State University. She has more than 15 years of experience developing and managing education, social justice, and gendered support programs focused on empowerment and safety for youth, families, and their adult allies. So my question, I know that you designed the Radical Monarchs to meet the needs of your own tween daughter. What is the most validating lesson you have learned from the process, and what, if anything, did you have to modify as the Radical Monarchs evolved?
Ooh, that's a great question. Hi, everybody. Honored to be here. So what I heard was, what is something that I learned as I watched my kind of daughter go through the process?
Yes.
And then what would I kind of maybe shift or change as the work continues or evolves?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the most amazing things in founding this work and in founding this movement has been seeing the evolution of the young girls, of the monarchs themselves, including my daughter. They've all continued to do amazing radical work since graduating from the Radical Monarchs. My daughter has worked on community murals about protecting water. She is currently really involved in food justice work and talking about food deserts and doing work in both East and West Oakland. She definitely is very vocal at her school. We've had other monarchs who ran for student body president after their experience at the Capitol. We've had monarchs go on to advocate to have ethnic studies in their schools. So I think that, you know, as a founder, I think seeing that has been one of the most profound things of the work. And in terms of what I would potentially shift as the work evolves, it's a good question. I think that I would just do more of, like, I think seeing is believing. And I think that for a lot of our young monarchs, I think them learning and seeing other women of color who are doing amazing radical things, I think has been so profound in their formation and what the possibilities can be for them, right? So I think that just doing a lot more of that and showing them the kind of like the wide range of like work, you know, I think is something that I would do more of.
Fascinating. I loved watching your movie. I'm a huge fan, and I want to see you guys everywhere. But back to the questions. I'd like to introduce Marilyn, Hollinquest, co-founder and CEO of Finances and Operations of the Radical Monarchs, who is a social justice advocate specializing in the empowerment of young women of color. She has more than 15 years of experience as a teacher, community advocate, and scholar. So Marilyn, this is a really strong question I had. Did you get any pushback from the parents of the girls about the Radical Monarch curriculum?
Did we get pushback? Well, I guess it would depend on how you define pushback. So anytime, you know, we have families, young monarchs, potential monarchs that apply to be in the program. And the reason we started the application process, this is once we, you know, had Troop 1, we were like, okay, it'd be great to have an application process to make sure that the potential monarch was really interested in the program, because sometimes you would have it where, you know, the families are like, you need to be in this. This is going to be good for you. But maybe your child is, you know, more into sports or music and is not really into activism in that way yet. So that's one thing. And when we do that application process, we're really clear about all of the types of badges that we earn. So whether it's from, you know, the Black Lives Matter badge to the Radical Pride badge. And so we really want to make sure that when the monarchs are earning these badges, that when they go home, these concepts are being reiterated. And so I think we saw a different comfort level with each badge. So for instance, when we did Radical Pride and we went to Trans March, not all of the families, you know, let their young monarch attend the Trans March. Like, they weren't necessarily that comfortable with it. So I wouldn't necessarily define it as pushback, but I would define it as a comfort level and what we call, you know, a stretch kind of goal, if you will. Like, not everybody's comfortable with certain topics. And even when we started with the Black Lives Matter badge with Troop Number 1, this was, you know, during the time of Ferguson, because we were founded December 2014. That's when BLM wasn't cute. Like, people were not into it. They were considered terrorists. They still are considered terrorists by the far right. So, you know, everyone has a different comfort level and a different entry point for their social justice kind of activism, I would say.
Okay, that's really interesting. You answered my next sort of part of that question, was if you had to select participants carefully to ensure that you would have uniformly shared values. So that really answers it. I was fascinated when watching the movie about so many of the family members were really in it and were really on board. And I wondered if you had to make sure that that was in fact going to be the case going forward. So that's very interesting. My next question is to Anayvette or Marilyn. Anayvette, excuse me. The United States has entire communities with generational trauma due to systemic racism, homophobia, blatant sexism, and sexual assault. Do you think that radical truth and radical acceptance can change the increasing trends of depression and anxiety, for example, that we see in adults and kids today?
Do you want me to start? Do you want to go, Marilyn?
I'll start.
Okay.
I love those terms, radical truth and radical acceptance. That to me just denotes, you know, an in-your-face, unapologetic stance, which, you know, we definitely love. And so I do think that would help decrease some anxiety for sure. There's lots of other things that would need to happen, but I think also, in addition to the radical truth and acceptance, is what we call radical self-love. So loving yourself unconditionally, no matter what, is really important. And especially now when the, you know, monarchs that are in our troops from Troop Number 1 on down, they're digital natives. And so, you know, they've grown up with Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook and all these sorts of things. And, you know, there's lots of research and documentaries that show how much the social media apps really impact your how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your life, and that they can increase anxiety if you don't use them in a healthy way. So I'm not saying like, oh, just, you know, totally get off of social media, but definitely the ways we interact with it, we definitely need to be mindful of that. I think the other thing that would help is therapy. Like, we live in a traumatic society. Like, everyone should have a really good therapist. I believe I do. And it's really helpful. So I think, you know, that's something I would add to that question. I don't know if I answered it exactly, but
You did. Thank you.
And I would just add to that, I think that and you see glimpses of this in the film. I think that, you know, these spaces that center young girls of color and their experiences are like sacred spaces, right? And they're therapeutic spaces. You see a couple moments where you have monarchs sharing and they get emotional. And I think, like, you know, they're reacting, right, to trauma, right, that they've experienced, either that comes from race or class or, you know, citizenship status from their family. And so this definitely comes out in group. And I think that it's powerful for them to sit with their sisters and to be able to share that and to be able to feel held and seen by their Radical Monarch sisters and by their troop leaders, you know, who we train to be able to, like, you know, have these conversations and hold that kind of a space. So definitely feel like, you know, this space is therapeutic, and I like the phrase of radical truth telling. I feel like that is so very much ingrained in our curriculum and in how we create these spaces for the monarchs. It's very much about, like, sharing your truth, sitting in your truth. You know, what have we been told about ourselves? What is the truth about ourselves, our communities, and our people? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. I love that radical self-love. That's obvious that is what you want the girls to have. And it is what they have. And it's very therapeutic. It's beautiful watching it. I want to introduce Linda Goldstein Knowlton. She's an Emmy-nominated filmmaker working in both documentary and scripted feature films, as well as in television. In addition to We Are the Radical Monarchs, Linda directed and produced Women in Hollywood, produced Code Black, Best Documentary winner at LA Film Festival and the Hamptons International Film Festival. Linda started her career producing feature films, including the award-winning Whale Rider and The Shipping News, and made her directorial debut with The World According to Sesame Street. So my question for you, Linda, what drew you, this is a two-part question, what drew you to the Radical Monarchs, and what made you feel that you were the right filmmaker to bring this story to the screen?
Hi. You'd think by now, 7 months into the pandemic, I'd get with the unmute situation. Sorry. Excellent question. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Karyn, for pulling this all together. What drew me to the Radical Monarchs were the intention. I mean, as you all saw in the film, Marilyn and Anayvette are the most intentional human beings I've ever met in my life. And that their intentions are articulated and focused in such a way that it is about what they've all been saying too, is of young girls of color being seen and heard and held and giving a space to blossom, right? It's not like they need to be taught. They're inherently amazing people, and they're just being given the tools and the space and the safe space to be able to grow into the women that they will become. So that was a magnet for me, their intentionality, and the idea of social justice is something that I've been involved with forever. So anything that has to do with social justice and girls, my company is called Ladylike Films, and yeah, so I just drew me in. Was I the right person to tell this film? I don't know. You know, there's as a white middle-aged Jewish lady, you know, was I really the right person to tell the film? Would a woman of color told this story in a different way? Likely. So I knew this going in when I went to talk to Anayvette and Marilyn, and we talked about it, you know, that I'm an outsider in this community. I feel that there's value that I can use my privilege in ways that can amplify their story and their organization. And, you know, and we discussed the idea that this could be an act of white allyship. And also, two things. One is that, you know, Marilyn made this really great point, is that most often the work of women of color is invisible, right? And so she said, you can document our work. That would be a good thing. I was like, okay, I would like to do that. And then also there is a collaborative nature to it in terms of this filmmaking. I mean, they knew everything that I was filming because they were there. So there were no surprises in that way. However, we talked from the beginning that if they ever wanted the camera turned off, the camera would be turned off, and the same for the girls. And that also that they would see the film before it was finished and be able to, we would discuss it and they would give notes, and there'd be merely meaningful conversations about changes, and so that it would reflect their reality as they see it. So that was a big part of it. I feel like there's one other part that I forgot, but that's, you know, that kind of collaboration.
Yeah,
I'll come back to it if I remember it. Might not be.
No, you answered it perfectly. I appreciate it, and the film was brilliant, and obviously you were exactly the right person to do it. I have one bombshell last question for you. What was the most powerful thing you learned from the Radical Monarchs?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh.
Linda.
I get the bombshell. Fine. What I learned was that I was not quite as woke as I thought. Being a, you know, social justice minded, very action oriented, being a politically active and in my communities wherever I've lived, I had so much to learn. I had so much to unlearn, understand my biases, and learn that, yeah, I mean, there were a couple of times when Anayvette and Marilyn said, you know, that's not appropriate. That's not an appropriate question for a white woman to ask a woman of color. And it was like, awesome. I mean, not awesome that I asked, but that we had the comfort level and the trust to be able to do that. So I learned a lot. And then I also learned through the process that being an ally for me is not enough, that I want to be an accomplice. I want to be a part of absolute meaningful action to make change. So yeah, so I learned that I had a lot to learn.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Linda, thank you.
I have another question, which is, despite the fact that our nation is facing a reckoning on both issues of systemic racism and misogyny, it was disheartening to hear in the documentary that only $1 million a year is going to programming that develops leadership in girls of color. That said, as a women's leadership organization, that wasn't really a shock to us. In a recent conversation we had with Wes Moore, we commiserated over the fact that the vast majority of philanthropy goes to universities and hospitals, many of which already have enormous endowments. How do we convince our society, in particular the larger women's community, which is coming into great wealth in this generation, to invest in leadership programs? I mean, we are out there telling the country that we're going to take back this country, perhaps in this election, and yet we can't seem to find money even for the most basic needs of training women and girls to become the leaders this country needs. And I just want to mention that they had received this extraordinary grant that maybe you'd like to talk about a little bit, but in fact, it's not, it has not come through in the way that they had hoped, which is one of these really damning things about the way philanthropy works in our country. So I don't know who would like to take on that question. Would that be Marilyn or?
That'd be me.
Okay.
That'd be me. So yeah, just to talk about the grant, I think it's at the end of the film, and it says like that we got this. It was pretty much like a lifeline grant. It was the biggest grant that we had gotten in over, you know, multiple years. And so this particular organization focused on funding girls and women of color. And so there's a lot of organizations that they funded through the stock dividends. And so, you know, we got a call from our program officer, and they were like, okay, great news, you got renewed for another 3 years. We were like, yes, it's the most amazing news ever. Just the stress of not having to worry so much. You still need to fundraise, of course, but not have to worry, you know, and be like, okay, like our backbone grant is going to be there. Great. And then, you know, maybe like 6 months later, we got another call from our program officer, and she told us that actually the foundation is going to go in a different direction. So they're not going to focus on girls and women of color. And actually the 3-year grant we were promised, it's just going to be 1 year. And so that was just, you know, it just felt like a gut punch of being promised 3 years. Because, you know, I can understand if you're like, you know what, we promised you 3 years, and after that 3 years, we're going to go in a different direction. Like, that's totally understandable, because then you get some leeway. But just to have, you know, 6 months in and be like, oops, psych, actually, we're not going to do that anymore. And so that just shows you the lack of authentic investment people have in girls and women in general, no matter what your racial background is, and then specifically girls and women of color, because we get even a smaller section of that money, and especially as a queer, you know, women of color led organization. So, you know, these things happen, and it's extremely unfortunate, and it just, you know, left us and a lot of people in this really, you know, scrambling kind of place of like, okay, so what do we do now? Like, you know, where should our focus be in terms of winning these grants? Because the other and last thing that I will say on this is the way that networks work. A lot of these organizations funders are invitation only, and we're seen as like risky and scrappy and as a startup. And so a lot of times foundations are risk adverse and they don't necessarily want to invest in us. We've been told more times that I can count, like, oh, when you get bigger, then we'll invest money. But it's like, well, how are we going to get bigger if you don't make an initial investment? And so, you know, you have these like billionaires who are promising parts of their wealth to redistribute it, which is great and amazing. And it's like, you have to know somebody in that billionaire circle. And, you know, because of myself and Anayvette's class background, and just positionality in society, like, we grew up working poor, working class. Like, I come from a family with a single mom. I was raised on welfare. Like, I don't know, you know, Silicon Valley tech billionaires. Like, I wish I did, but I don't. So it's like, well, how do we get an invitation to the party when, you know, they don't know us yet? Like, and that was a plus about having Linda wanting to partner with us, and I will say be an amazing ally and, you know, use her privilege as a white woman to get us into these circles that we would not have gotten into without her help. Like, literally, like, that is just the truth. Like, we would not have gotten there without her help. So yeah, that's what it is.
You know, one of the philosophies we've had at Project Kesher is that the people who support us, we're not the only thing in their portfolio. And the reality is that you're also not in competition with us for the most part. You're a domestic program, we're international. You're dealing with a completely different demographic than we are. And I think that, you know, to the extent that there is any privilege in this organization, because the people that we work with, you know, they're also quite poor, but it's a very different demographic. And I would just open it up to people in this community tonight who've gathered for this film to say that if you know of people in your community, individuals or foundations, who would be open to the work that they're doing, we are finding it profoundly moving to see what they have accomplished with the young girls they work with. And for those of you who know, Project Kesher has had a long history of working with teens. But the thought that we could start earlier with young girls who may not have the burden yet of understanding how oppressive society can be and the barriers that they may have to overcome in order to achieve the societies that they should be living in. I think it's just a very important thing, and that our country desperately needs the radical monarch. One of the things I really appreciated the other night was watching this film with my partner, Ed, who looked at me and said, it is such a shame that anything that they are doing has to be perceived as radical. It should be just how the world is. And I love the fact that you frame it as radical, because it makes us sit up and take notice. But, you know, calling for like radical kindness or radical body acceptance, any of those things should just be how the world should be, as opposed to something that we consider to be beyond the scope of what our very promising yet unfulfilled society has to deliver at this stage in time. So I would welcome everybody to become part of the Radical Monarchs, you know, community as well as ours, because I do think that they have so much to offer. At this time, I would love to open this up and invite anybody who has questions. We had a few come in earlier today that we will take right away, and then go from there. I just want to say hi to our lovely founder, Sally Gratch. Sally, would you like to say a few words? We need you to unmute.
Definitely. Thank you, Karyn. When I saw the film, where my mind went was what a wonderful opportunity for two groups who are at different levels of development can work together and learn from each other. I really could, you know, it's one thing to admire each other's progress or ambition. It's another thing to share where each of us has started and how we've moved along. That is what working women do together. They share their sorrows, their gains, their losses, and I would hope that Project Kesher, our board, and the board of Radical Monarchs could also, the board or whoever works with you, could come together and share. How did you get where you are? How did you develop those ideas? We have so much to learn from each other. Thanks.
Wendy Lazar shared a couple of questions. Wendy, do you want to go to speak out loud and to share them yourself, or should we read them off? I'm not sure if she's still here. Let's see. Oh, there she is.
Here I am. A minute. I'll even bring my picture back. The video was just remarkable. I mean, there is no other way to describe it. But I guess my first question is, are all the girls in one-parent female households?
No, it's very diverse. We have, you know, single family, single family headed families. We have dual headed families. We have like LGBT families. We have same-sex partner families. It's really a mix.
Did I not see any males attending the graduations, or did I miss? There seemed to be a shortage of them. That's why the question.
Yeah, I mean, the fathers are definitely a little bit more in the background, right? And so I think that some of that may be intentional on their part, you know, and some of it might not be. But there were definitely some men and fathers and uncles at the graduation, but definitely it was more so the mothers. I think you do see one of the fathers, Renee, is interviewed in the documentary,
yeah.
Who's the father of a monarch. So, but definitely I would say that the mothers are much more, you know, the women are much more involved in supporting their monarchs in participating in our group.
Oh, and my next question was that in the video, there was a brief reference to the terrible heat that you took from on social media and from conservative newscasters, if that's what they can be called. How has it impacted the program, and has it continued? How have you combated it?
Yeah. Do you want to answer that, Marilyn? Do you want me?
Yeah, I'll answer that. So initially when that story came out on Fox, well, just to rewind it a little bit. So we were interviewed with a local paper, And so a local newscaster, a Black woman actually, and this was really early on. And so, you know, we're like, okay, great. Yeah, like cover us and our story. And then when it came out, it had this really sensational title, like, Are the Radical Monarchs, you know, raising little racists, like, and we were like, what? That is not the angle that you said you were gonna have. Like the way she approached us too. And that just, you know, confirms that saying, not all skin folk are kinfolk. So they actually, that station was a Fox affiliate. They sold our footage to, I think, was it Bill O'Reilly or whoever? Whichever, I get them mixed up. Anyway,
Sean Hannity.
so, oh, Hannity, see, but same difference. So they sold it to them, and then they actually reached out to us and were like, do you want to be on the show? And we were like, absolutely not. Like for us, it was just would be a waste of time and energy, and then also would just encourage more hatefulness. And so there were several things that happened. Bomb threats to the girls' schools. We got all sorts of trolls and hate on all of our social media platforms, people, you know, being really like sexually inappropriate comments about the girls and their bodies and about us. I have a Twitter account, which I like don't even use, but I got called all sorts of N words and B words and all the like. So we got all of that hate. And so what happened was we just had to increase our security because it was really important that, you know, we protect the monarchs and ourselves. And so some of the things that we did were for Anayvette, who handles communications, she stopped posting where we were in real time. So that way people couldn't like find us when we were out and about in the neighborhood or like having a meeting. So that still continues. Like she will post after the fact where we're already gone. So nobody can come and just like pop up on us. The other thing, when, you know, folks would drop off for meetings, because sometimes it would be like a friend dropping off the monarch or something like that. Like I was like door security, just making sure, you know, like who are you, which monarch are you affiliated with, because it would be people that sometimes we hadn't met before. I don't know if there were any other things like major adjustments that we had, Anayvette, if you want to add anything to that. But and to the last part of the question too, we haven't had a huge increase like that recently of hate, but you know, anytime our story gets around, that tends to happen. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I would just add that anytime we get any kind of more mainstream publicity is when the trolls kind of come out of the woodwork, and we do receive you know, hate mail and hate messages. The only other thing that we did do as a safety precaution is we never name the monarchs, like the girls themselves, in our accounts. Like when we post pictures, we just refer to them as monarchs. We never use their names.
My mom asked me a question earlier today as she was watching it, and she said, considering the direction that you went with the organization, she thought it was so interesting that you nevertheless chose to put the girls in the little brown vests and to give them patches sort of consistent with a more traditional model. And she was wondering if you had ever thought about whether you would, you know, embrace that part of the traditional model, or if you, or you just thought that this was really sort of a charming aspect of the historical kind of troupe that existed.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the vests and the badges are inspired by, you know, the Girl Scouts, right? Which was where this all kind of came from, was my daughter wanting to join a traditional scouting troop, and then her being one of two girls of color in that troop, and then me feeling like that wouldn't really, you know, center or speak to her experience as a young girl of color, and then wanting to like think about what would it look like to be able to like borrow from traditional elements of scouting, but then to radicalize it, right? So that's why we decided to keep the vests and the badges. I think there's also something to be said about, you know, the feeling of like accomplishment and earning like a badge for it. I think for young people, I think that's important, you know, like it's like their little paycheck. It's like the little badge, you know? So I think that element felt really empowering and special to keep. So yeah, that's why we ended up keeping the vest and the badges.
I think that from a Project Kesher perspective, it's something we really appreciated because the women we work with get certificates for all of their accomplishments. And then everybody gathers in a circle and we slam on the table and stomp on the floor and we shout at everyone in Russian, you know, like, Svetlana, she can do anything. And then we cheer them out of the room. And so when you were giving them their badges, it very much evoked our feeling of sort of, you know, that radical sisterhood of saying to them, like, you may not even believe in yourself yet, but we are betting on you. Like, we know you're going to do it. I want to call on Kate, who said she had a question to share.
Yes. First of all, I tend to speak in superlatives, and I don't have enough superlatives in my vocabulary to say how amazing I think you, Marilyn, Anayvette, and also Linda are. So thank you for creating the Radical Monarchs, and thank you, Linda, for documenting them. My two major questions, and one of them we addressed a little bit, are about funding and reach. I was thrilled at the end of the film, which I'm still going crazy about, to see that there was funding that was given to you, although I understand it might not have lasted for as long as you would like. So my first question is, where does funding stand now? And in terms of reach, where are the Radical Monarchs now? How many groups are there? And then I'm going to add a third part because I like trifectas. What can any of us and our circles do to help potentially expand that funding and or that reach? Because clearly you guys are onto something, and it needs to be, you need to be here, and you need to be long-standing and lasting. So those three things: funding, reach, what can we do?
I can start with the reach question, and then Marilyn, if you want to talk about the funding, about where we are right now.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, in terms of reach, we currently have 6 troops. They're all centered here in the Bay Area. So we've graduated 2 troops of Monarchs, Troop 1 and Troop 2, which you saw in the film. And then last fall, we launched 4 new troops. So we currently have our first troop in San Francisco, our first troop in Richmond, California, and 2 new troops in Oakland, California. So we have 4 new troops and 2 alumni troops, which are still very active as alumni. When our Monarchs graduate, they still participate with us through our alumni program. And currently, right now, we're actually preparing to do kind of like an announcement nationally to see which other communities are ready to launch their own troops. And so we've been working really hard on kind of like, what does it look like to be able to kind of, simmer down launching a troop? Like, what are all the little different pieces that it takes to launch a troop? And so that it will be happening very soon. So we've prepared all the materials for potential troop leaders, troop assistants, and also families that are interested in just having their young person participate. So very soon, it's looking like it's going to be going national.
Well, I know Jessica's ready.
Say it again.
I said, I know Jessica's ready in Montclair, New Jersey. So she's hoping you'll expand there.
And so then in terms of funding, where we're at, so as I mentioned, the multi-year grant, the one multi-year grant, the major, I would say, we have other smaller multi-year grants. And so those are actually by individuals. So we're in the process of hiring a fourth actually, staff person. And so it's myself and Anayvette, and it was for, the longest of times. And then we hired Victoria, who's awesome. And so she's the programs and comms manager, and she works with Anayvette. And so as on the finance and operations wheelhouse side, if you will, I definitely, am needing help. And so we got a multi-year grant from actually a pair of sisters. And so that's how we're hiring the fourth person to come on and just help expand and deepen our foundation financially. So in terms of where we're at, we are definitely, have enough to continue for like the year for sure, and also have, you know, a cushion as well. But, you know, we still are in desperate need of multi-year grants, whether they come from, you know, individual donors or from a traditional foundation. We're still trying to get invitations to these major foundations and billionaires and that sort of thing. And so we also have a really robust individual donor base, which is great. Like, a lot of people are monthly donors and that sort of thing. And so we're still in the thick of it. We're still in the push. And I think, you know, as nonprofits, that just tends to be the way it is. And, you know, what a blessing it would be just, you know, if like 3 foundations just were like, here's, you know, some multi-year grants for you so you can continue the work, because the demand is really high. But, you know, we're a small team of people. And so we really do want to meet that demand. But in order to meet the demand, we need funding in order, you know, to pay staff and so on. So we're still, you know, in there pushing and doing, and we're definitely positive folks. So, and I know that we'll get those funds together. So yeah, that's where we're at financially in a little snapshot.
Marilyn and I are going to be talking on Thursday night. So if anyone in the community has any leads that they would like us to explore, please, you know, send them in my direction, and she and I will be brainstorming. There's a few very special things that, you know, I think members of our community could potentially open doors for. So I would love to put that out there. I would also say that, you know, there are other things, like we were introduced to the University of Chicago giving us a summer intern for the last few years. We got one from McGill, fully funded. So, you know, to the extent that you know of opportunities that they may not have been introduced to yet, if we know of them, we'll pass them on. But if you know of them, please give us the heads up. Our board chair, Sheila Lambert, would love to say a couple of words. Sheila?
Okay, I'm unmuted. First of all, I also want to say that the film was just magnificent. I think a lot of us watched it right before we came on here. So we were very inspired to come on and meet all of you. You know, I must say that I was thinking, as you talked about expanding, going national, all that, you know, I was thinking about the Project Kesher model. Our model basically is to expand one women's group at a time, and to sort of have information and infrastructure that we can pass on to those groups, and then let them sort of take over. And I'm just offering that I'm sure Karyn, I certainly would, and others of us would be willing to share how that worked. Now, obviously it was in the former Soviet Union, it's not here in this country, but certainly that our model might be helpful to you. And I'm even thinking that if you were planning to, you know, that people would apply to you to set up their own chapters, and they could do some fundraising to set up their chapters too in their local communities and in their localities. And that could help you so that you're not trying to do all this fundraising to set, you know, to set chapters up all over the country. But I think the idea of having people set up their own with guidance from you may take some of the financial burden that you're feeling off of you and allow you to be successful.
Yeah, thank you for that. We actually have developed something similar. So we in thinking about expansion, we developed what we're calling a community cost structure. And what that is that we try to keep the cost for the community as low as possible for anyone who wants to launch their own troop community. And the amount of money that we say it costs to run a troop is very little, right? But we still think it's incredibly important that because you're working with young people, you're working with young girls, and because Marilyn and I are both, you know, experts in this work, we feel it's important that they get trained by us. So it's not like here's the curriculum and go run with it, because we've seen, both of us have done youth development work for 15 years plus, and we've seen the pitfalls of organizations that try to replicate, and the training is just kind of like lost. And for us, you know, it's like, it's incredibly important for quality control,
Right.
that we be the ones that train, that train the troop leaders, that train the assistants, and that we're the ones that are constantly available to provide technical assistance. We do ongoing quarterly trainings with the troop leaders so that they're constantly evolving their knowledge around different things that are happening and different methods and how to work with young girls of color around things that are happening around them or in the community. So yeah, so I mean, I think that our program and budget model is very much rooted in like the troops being self-sustaining, right? That each individual troop raises, I want to say it's like $4,000 for a year, and that's a curriculum that includes training, that includes the uniform. So each troop kind of like fundraises for that amount, which is like the bare bones minimal. And then we are fundraising constantly for our positions, right? For us to be able to still, you know, grow the work and train, and also to be able to, you know, observe and support, right? Because we learned a lot in observations in like what kind of support troop leaders need, right? So we think that's also an important piece of our structure and our model. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, but it does sound quite familiar in terms of, you know, wanting to spread it out there, still wanting to have the quality control and making sure that the programming is going the way you want it to, but relying on the individual locations to take it forward.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I think this has been such a wonderful program to get to know the Radical Monarchs. I want to thank Linda for being so receptive when I reached out to her about sharing this film with us. And I do hope that as we move forward, you know, the Radical Monarch community will feel free to call upon us and let us know how we can help support their work. I am optimistic that we will come up with some really good ideas together. So thank you all for dropping in on this Tuesday night, and I hope that you'll join us again. We just completed our 3-part series of events for the fall, but we will be designing a few for the spring, and I think that we'll all breathe a little easier after the election on November 3rd. So fingers crossed, and we'll see you all in a few weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.